About a month or two ago, I picked up a job at the local seaside aquarium. It's nothing special, just a minimum wage job mopping the floors and cleaning the glass so that everything will be clean when the morning comes. Work starts at 2 p.m. There's a lot of ground to cover, but the task is mundane enough that getting overstressed isn't an issue. No, it's not the work that frays my nerves. It's what's in the tanks. 2 people work the night shift. Jared, a kid straight out of high school, and me. We usually start at the entrance and then split up from there. He takes garbage duty with all the outside pens, and I take the inside complex solo till he finishes up enough to help me. He's a nice enough guy, shy around girls. I could barely get a word out of him when we first met, but his work skills make up for his muteness. Together, we are the night crew, and between us, I thought everything would be all right. Things changed a month in. That's when I started noticing the puddles that kept appearing in rooms I'd yet to mop, places I'd yet to step. They would make trails around the floor tiles, like something was flopping around like a fish out of water. I'd check the tanks, and with no leaks and cracks, they'd all be in order. After a few days of this, Jared and I would ask our boss about it, see if maybe one of the pipes busted and was leaking through the floor, but she assured us that that couldn't be the case. She assured us that all the pipes and systems, including the water tank, were well maintained since that certain incident happened a few years back. We had to trust her because we both knew what she was talking about. As much as the aquarium tries to deny it, us locals will never forget how 10 years ago one of the workers shoved his screaming daughter into one of the maintenance tanks. Jammed her in there till she was a contorted mess to let the salt water choke her out and rot her bones. Strangely, no body was actually found, just floating pieces of her flesh in a waterlogged dress. "We take better precautions now," my boss simply told me, then ushered us on our way. Despite all her assurances, it didn't stop the water from building up in the most random places. And in the days to follow, my annoyance slowly turned into a rising dread as I began to notice that the puddles were beginning to follow me, like wet footprints shadowing my own. Those thoughts were beginning to get to me, especially as the puddles began getting closer and closer to me as each night went by. It got to the point where I would have Jared with me all the time, because they seemed to keep their distance whenever he was around. Needless to say, I felt a bit embarrassed about asking to be escorted, but I could see it in his eyes that he was beginning to think I was a little paranoid. And paranoid was something I didn't want to be. So, as an attempt to calm my nerves, I would bring my iPod with me, plug it into my ears and let the music be my company as I mopped dark hallways full of half-lit tanks and the flickering shadows of the creatures that inhabited them. The turning point happened that night when we were walking through the tube, made entirely out of glass and going straight through a massive shark tank. It was one of the main attractions. There aren't any lights in the tube, so we had to bring our own. I remember how I would wave my flashlight away whenever I saw a shark, as if that was the scariest thing I would see that night. My headphones were on, an old 60s ballad serenading my ears, when I noticed it. A second set of words singing underneath the lyrics, something I never heard before. It was enough to make me stop and listen to the eerie, echoing second chorus. It wasn't until Jared slipped off my headphones did I realize the voice wasn't coming from my iPod. I can't remember what I was thinking right then. Maybe I was too scared to think at all. I knew something was right behind me, something making my mind scream at me to keep walking till I was out of there and safe at home. But I turned around anyway. A wall of black made up the entrance to the tube, my flashlight too far away to pierce it. The high-pitched, animalistic wail slowly choked out. Then, nothing. Jared and I looked at each other, and I could tell he was almost as pale as I was. We were both drowning in the silence. Someone had to make a decision and do it fast before we both lost our minds. A minute passed. Then...
Don't worry. I'll go check it out.
Jared said more words to me than he had ever uttered throughout our entire janitorial career together. How about we just keep moving? That side's clean, no need to go back there, I replied, sounding more frightened than I wanted to.
I know how much you hate the dark, so you can stay put. It'll be all right.
Was all he said before he vanished into the shadows, leaving me with nothing but a flashlight and 2 mop buckets. So I stood there in the tube, enduring the longest 30 minutes of my life. The sharks lazily swam around me, sometimes brushing up against the glass and causing me to jump. It was like they were watching me, waiting for something to happen. A little past a half hour, I heard it, the telltale drip of water cascading off a wet body and onto the floor. Something was at the end of the hallway, standing right at the edge of the shadows. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. Just standing there as a puddle formed beneath it, looking at me. My brain did the first thing it could think of. I raised the flashlight like a weapon. Hello? It moved fast. All I saw was a pale blur before pain erupted in my chest. I screamed as I fell backwards, the flashlight clattering away from me. My head cracked into the mop bucket, spilling dirty suds across the glass. Whether it was water or blood on my face, I didn't care, because darkness was suddenly upon me and I was very, very alone. I needed to get the flashlight. My priorities were simple as I wrapped my fingers around it and turned it back on. Find Jared. I found something else instead. It was banging its head against one of the fish tanks, beating out a dull rhythm till black blood began to trickle down the cracked glass. Nothing but sickly folds of skin with no bone definition. It just sat there, bent and stretched arms tucked into its side like fins, cysts leaking pus over boils and odd cuts. Slowly, it turned to me, whatever left of its spine creaking in protest as it bent in a way no human should. I swear my heart stopped at that moment as I stared through the ragged, salt-bleached hair and stared into the contorted and bloated face of a little girl. Its jaw hung half-dislocated from its face, the tatters of a familiar dark blue sweatshirt hanging from its slimy maw as it gaped at me stupidly. Jared? I dropped the flashlight. The thing pounced, knocking me against the ground with a sickening thud. The last thing I saw before my eyes closed was the rippling form of the creature, girl, whatever it was, bite the cover off a vent and disappear into it with a wet slurp. A few mildly concerned paramedics and an incredibly annoyed boss were hovering over me when I finally awoke. Apparently, I was at fault for delaying the opening of the aquarium, but for some reason I didn't quite seem to care. They found Jared, half shoved into one of the water treatment tanks. Miraculously, he was alive. I barely remember how hard I gripped his arm as we were rolled into the ambulance together. I was babbling, trying to explain what happened, but my words were always met with sympathetic faces and questions of how hard I hit my head. My boss merely shushed me, whispering the words I've been hearing since the day I was hired. Don't worry, we take better precautions now. Those precautions were to fire Jared and me, and stick us with the bill for fixing the cracked tank. Now I'm spending my summer moving inland, where dirt and trees replace sand and salt water. Jared and I are keeping in touch, though he hasn't uttered a word since that night. I think he likes hanging around, so I might ask him along. But I don't sleep anymore. I lie awake at night listening to the sink drip as I imagine the water running through the pipes in the walls. I have nightmares of drowned little girls, shoved to the bottom of my water tank and rippling monstrosities dripping down my stairs. And sometimes I wake up to a puddle of water at the end of my bed.